All right.
Right. So, good morning to everyone.
Good morning.
We're in the third chapter of Pirkei Avot, and unless somebody has any additional things that they want to add to our commentary to Mishnah 5, according to this edition that I have in front of me, of the word, this person who stays up at night and walks around all by themselves and turns their hearts to trivial matters or to insignificant or nothingness. So all of these things are terrible. You're sinning against yourself. You endanger your life. Any other comments on that, or we go to the next Mishnah? All right, we're going to go to the next Mishnah. So this is Mishnah 6, and it's attributed to Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana. Right? We're not quite sure what ben Hakana means, but is this a person who is a reed maker from a kaneh? A kaneh is a reed. So he was the son of a reed maker, or is this the place? We know that there's in Christian stories, there's the Feast of Cana. So who knows? Anyway, Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana was a figure who later became revered as a great mystic, and he was considered the teacher of important mystical teachings. He's a figure in early mysticism, Hechalot literature, and other things like that. So we'll see what our Mishnah has to say. But meanwhile, I want to read to you another Mishnah where his teaching is recorded, and this is a Mishnah from Masechet Brachot. So bear with me for half a second here, and here is here's the Mishnah. The Mishnah is chapter 4 in Tractate Brachot, and it's the second Mishnah. Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana hayamit palel b'knisato lebeit hamidrash uv'yitziato tefillah tzara. Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana, when he entered the Beit Midrash and when he would leave the Beit Midrash, he would as he would enter the Beit Midrash, he would say a short prayer. And when he would leave the Beit Midrash, he would say a short prayer. So Amrulo, Mamakom Tfilazo. So they asked him, what exactly is this special appropriateness that you feel that you should give a prayer? What is the prayer? Amar Lahem. So he explained to them, Biknisati. So this is a personal prayer that he would recite. And then people were observing him and noticed that he was doing this personal private prayer. And they started asking him what he was doing. So this private prayer became now a Mishnah, and now it's famous. And here we are 2,000 years later, repeating this personal private moment that he had. So he said, "B'knisati ani mitpalel." When I enter, I pray, "Shelo te'arev takala al yadi," that there should be no stumbling caused by me. In other words, when I offer my opinions, when I say an interpretation, whenever I engage in Torah study, that I shouldn't say something that afterwards, people will take it, I'll be wrong, and then they'll base themselves on what I said, and something bad might happen, right? So nothing like that should happen. Uvitziati ani noten hodaya al chalki. And when I leave, I give thanks for the portion that is mine, that I was able to be part of this experience of coming into a study hall with other people and engaging in Torah. So that's the way he explains it. That's what he says, and now we have that as a tradition for us. Of course, we have done similar things. When we have the traditional Amidah prayer that we recite, at the end of the Amidah, there's a paragraph. Oh my God, guard my tongue from speaking evil. So if we pay attention to that prayer in its formulation, until that prayer, everything in the Amidah has been formulated in the plural. Sim shalom aleinu, right? Bring peace to all of us, right? Slach lanu, forgive all of us, right? Whatever it is, all of the prayers are written in the plural. This prayer says Elokai, my God, that's singular. So this was a personal prayer. It was a personal prayer of one of the sages. It was recorded in the Talmud, and then it became so accepted by people. People thought it was such a good prayer that it became part of the Siddur. So personal prayers that eventually became publicized, some of them then became a part of our heritage and were adopted then by everybody. And then instead of becoming something personal, spontaneous that was offered by an individual, it became a formula. So we got to say that final prayer. Let's see if I can say it, in a half a nanosecond and get it over with. Something that was an outpouring of emotion and feeling becomes standard. So anyway, but Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana in this particular case is a figure who reveres the experience of studying Torah with others. He doesn't want to be somebody who's going to contribute something that's not worthwhile. And then afterwards, he's so grateful that he took part in it. So now let's see what he says. So first we need our standard versions of translation, and then we'll go to Bill, who I hope has the Rabbi Shapiro version.
I do.
Okay, Geraldine, you go first.
Okay. Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana Omer, whoever accepts the yoke of Torah will be spared the burdens of citizenship and of earning a livelihood. But whoever throws off the yoke of Torah will have to bear the burdens of citizenship and of earning a livelihood.
Okay, so, and we actually looked at this last time and noticed the specific translations for the two terms that are used here for citizenship and for livelihood. We'll get back to that in a second. Bill, what's your translation?
It seems to be utterly different, almost as if he was translating from a different Hebrew text. Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana teaches, devotion to Torah frees you from power and possessions. Ignore Torah and they will crush you.
Okay, so the word we talked about it last time, ol is a yoke, not an egg yolk, but a yoke that's used to harness an animal, or sometimes, sadly, might even be to harness a human being like a slave to do some physical burdensome work. So we have here the idea that the Torah be accepted upon oneself like a yoke, right? Let the Torah be something that directs everything that you're doing. The same way that an animal, once it has a yoke on its neck, it can't do anything that, it can't go up to the pasture and go grazing. It has to do the work. It has to do whatever it is. It has to pull the plow. It has to, make the granary thing go around. So this is what the Torah is compared to here by Nechunya ben Hakana, to accept upon yourself the yoke of the Torah. You have to figure out what would that entail actually. But if you do, so the literal translation is, then we or they, it's a plural construct, we take away from that person the same word is used again, the yoke of malchut. So in the standard translation that most people have, the yoke of, well, Gerald's was citizen.
Citizenship.
Does anybody else have a different translation along those political lines? Yeah, Craig.
Rabbi Hertz says the yoke of the kingdom.
Right. So the word malchut is literally the kingdom, right? It comes from the melech, a king. So we have, again, all malchut shemayim, I mentioned it last time as well, the angels up in heaven accept upon themselves the yoke of the kingdom of heaven to serve God. So malchut means kingdom. Okay, so we have two different kinds of ideas of what yoke we're talking about. What responsibilities or what kind of situation of being answerable to are we talking about? One translation says citizenship, and that we understand in modern times is the situation where because you're part of a society, you have to participate in that society. And if you are going to benefit from the society, you also have to put work into making that society function properly. So, we have this struggle every time we have an election. People that don't want to vote, that can't be bothered, that's part of the yoke of citizenship. That's part of this. It's a burden. It's a responsibility that you have to put on yourself, whether you like it or not. Paying taxes is a yoke of citizenship. And that already is cutting into the other side of it, answering to the government, right? Answering to the rulers, right? So here, Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana says that if you take upon yourself a total subjugation to Torah, then we exempt you, would be another way of reading this, we exempt you from the obligations toward malchut, toward government, toward rulership, or toward citizenship. And the other is, the term is Dereference. That's the Hebrew. So in Gerald's translation, it was what? Livelihood, earning a livelihood?
Earning a livelihood.
Right. So that's one way of reading it. Craig, what do you have?
Rabbi Hertz says the yoke of worldly care.
Worldly care. Okay, so the word literally derech eretz, the way of the world, the way of the earth, right? The way of the land, eretz, like Eretz Israel, the land of Israel. So we have it in our usage. We say derech eretz. What do we mean when we say derech eretz? Behave with derech eretz.
Behave decently, according to the.
With respect. With respect, right? Be considerate. Respect your elders.
Yeah.
Right? Do you have, don't talk like that to your parents. Have derech eretz.
Yes.
Right? So, or, so derech eretz, we usually use the term to refer to somebody who is thoughtful about other people, thoughtful about their place in the world, in their relationships with other people, and they treat other people with consideration. Right? Derech eretz is to be considerate. So that's the way we think of it in that kind of emotional, ethical way. But that really wasn't mostly the way that the rabbis used it. One way was derech eretz, meaning that it's the way of the world that you have to make a living. You have to go and meet your obligations you have to feed yourself, you have to have a family, you have to feed your family. You have to go out there and participate, and that's the way of the world. That's the way of the world. Sometimes it also means it's a euphemism for sexual behavior, because that's also the way of the world. But here, it's contextually, it's most likely the idea of being involved in commercial livelihood issues. Now, once we think about that, people sometimes get consumed with those kinds of things and becomes worldly cares, like what Rabbi Hertz was saying, right? So then you start, all of the things that you start worrying about that become, the most important thing in your life. You know, should I refinance my mortgage or not? You know, should I take it down from 4% to 3% before it goes up to 5%? And you lose sleep over it. So that's the idea of the burden of this kind of worldly focus. So what Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana says is we have a choice. Some people will take upon themselves the burden of Torah, the yoke of Torah. Some people will throw off the burden of Torah. So we have to understand then. So what is he referring to? If we have different interpretations of what the citizenship, livelihood, rulership kinds of things are, another way of rulership is to be a ruler. If you're not subjugating yourself to the yoke of Torah, then you have other possible responsibilities like being a ruler, being a leader. This is, another option. So what's the yoke of Torah here referred to? What can we understand it to mean?
Well, a simple way is to accept the requirement of fulfilling the mitzvot, the commandments,
Right.
with punctiliousness and care.
Okay, so that would be a basic proposition of saying, accept upon yourself the responsibility to follow the ways of the Torah. The Torah tells you do this, don't do that, and you're scrupulous about following those mitzvot. Keep the mitzvot, with what we read about all the time in our prayers, in our Torah, in our Haftarah readings. God is always complaining that we don't listen to God enough. So that would be one way of understanding that. But if that was the way that we understood it, who is expected to accept upon themselves the yoke of Torah in that interpretation?
All of us.
All of us, right? So there's then what would happen? What would happen then if you had success? All of the Jewish people all accepted upon themselves the yoke of Torah. So then what would happen to society? Would there be anybody living or earning a livelihood?
No.
I mean, who would be the person, who would go to Congress
Here.
to make the laws? Who would try to be involved in, if it was in all of the different kinds of interpretations that we had before, who would pay taxes? If every single person, if this is what he's talking about, which is a universally obligatory standard, if he's saying if that's what it is, then you won't have to do any of the other stuff. So that's a recipe for disaster. That's a recipe for a completely dysfunctional society. Then you wouldn't be able to have a group of people living together. So how would we answer that objection? Craig?
Well, maybe he's saying that if you accept upon yourself the mitzvot and the teachings and all that, then the worldly events, parts of your life won't be as burdensome to you. So it won't be like a yoke.
It won't be a burden. It'll just be put in perspective, and it'll take care of itself. You'll take care of it, but without getting bent out of shape by it. Right? What does the yoke do after all? It bends us down. It keeps us hunched over. So it would be then we'd be able to take it much more smoothly. Okay, good. That would be one way to look at it. What would be another way to answer that objection? Anybody else? Well, another way to think about what Craig was saying. Can you imagine if actually making a living wasn't a burden? Nobody was bothered by it. Nobody was wondering, should I go into work? Should I try to, negotiate with my boss about, being able to stay home 3 days a week? What if all of these cares disappeared? It would be the Garden of Eden. It would be great. It would be paradise. So what some people say is that Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana is ruefully saying, if we all could get our act together and all of us would actually follow the Torah, then Mashiach would come. Then there would be no problems that we have, the kind of political and social and economic worries that we have. We would get to the end of days when everything would be easy and perfect. The problem is that we're not all doing that. So that's why we live in the world as it is. So that was one way of possibly looking at this. There's another way to look at it, and that is that our definition of the yoke of Torah is not that definition. That definition that Bill was offering is a universal expectation. We're all obligated to follow the Torah, and both in the positive sense and in the negative sense, to avoid the things that the Torah tells us are no good. But let's remember what he did when he walked into the study hall. Right? He was reverential, and he was in awe of his responsibility when he walked into the study. I hope I don't say anything that's a mistake. Somebody is going to take what I say and they're going to run with it. And if I say something wrong, I'm going to be the cause of some kind of misunderstanding or wrong behavior or whatever. So he was feeling his own kind of malchut, his own authority within the Beit Midrash. And when he left, he would be thankful that I was able to spend another day in the Beit Midrash. So many people would say that what he's talking about here is a super extraordinary devotion to the study and propagation of Torah, not the simple behavioral, thing that everybody's expected to do. We're all supposed to follow the Torah. But what he's talking about is he's talking about an elite. He's talking about those people who take upon themselves the yoke of Torah as a 24/7, occupation, preoccupation, set of concerns, and that all that they are looking at is studying Torah and putting out the Torah as a teaching for everybody else. So he's talking about what became the rabbinic class. And he's talking about the people that became the virtuosi of Torah. Some of us can play piano or violin or guitar, but we're not Segovia, and we're not Yasha Heifetz, and we're not those people practice 20 hours a day and play and so on and so forth. They are the people who take upon themselves the yoke of their instrument or their music, their field. So that would be another way. Then we're talking about a small group of people. And then what we might think about is that he's saying, yes, society is always going to have Dereference. It's always going to be the way of the world. People are always going to have to hustle to make a buck and think about who else they could help or what it means to get a job, give a job, treat people fairly in the marketplace. We have government, we have society, we've got traffic rules, we've got taxation rules, we've got voting cycles. We've got all of these kinds of governmental. Should we pass rent control in Montclair or not? Things like that. That's never going to go away, and most of us could be involved in that one way or another. But then there's some people are just going to be in that ivory tower. They're going to be in the ivory tower of studying Torah and teaching Torah, right? They're going to be in the Beit Midrash, and then we don't have that expectation of them. We don't put upon them the burden of everything else. So that's another possible interpretation. We might look into this a little bit next time some more. Nick, what do you want to say?
I have a question. I may be misunderstanding this, but it strikes me as it's all or nothing. What about the middle ground?
So the middle ground is a middle ground. The middle ground is what people do to make the best of what they can make of. But the middle ground is wonderful, but it's not the province of the Nobel Prize winner. It's not the province of the Carnegie Hall musician. It's not that, it's great for people to learn how to play piano. If there wouldn't be that middle ground, there wouldn't be a world in which the elite could function. If it weren't for other people who were involved in one way or another, to some degree or another, in Torah or in music or in science or in politics or in economics or whatever, then the high-powered people, the people that spend night and day on their field, would have nobody to work for. But what he's talking about is, but we still need some people who this is their obsession. This is their exclusive passion. And they can't be asked to do other things. We have so many artists, for instance. I think you struggled with this once upon a time. If you're going to have to drive a cab 20 hours a day, how are you going to write the great American novel? How are you going to go and audition to be, the next Marlon Brando or something like that? So these are the push and the pull. So there are many people who do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and God bless them. But there's some people that will need that kind of, full scholarship, let's say, right, in order for them to be able to do what they need to do. Okay, we're going to stop here. Unfortunately, we ran out of time for this. Let's come back next week. Josie, hold on to what your thought is, and let's see what we can come back to again. Okay?
I
Thank
couldn't
you.
get into this class. They wouldn't let me in.
Here
That's
you
why
are.
I apologize.
Here you are. All right.
Yashikok, stay